Hello everyone, welcome to Excavating Wisdom's Mythology Matters 3. Today we're going to be talking about Odin Allfather a little bit more. Last time we talked about how Odin sacrificed an eye and Mimir's well for wisdom. Today we're going to be looking at the story of how Odin Allfather hung himself from Yggdrasil and gained wisdom that way. So if that sounds interesting, feel free to stick around. And there's a chance that a cat might show up at some point here, so here playing around. So if you want to see a cat get in my way and annoy me, stick around for that too. Alright, thanks. If you see a tail, it's a cat. She's not being very helpful. Okay, so let's start with going through the story. Now, this is from a few different translations. I mushed them together to whatever I thought sounded and flowed the best. But this is the story of Odin sacrificing himself to himself on Yggdrasil, the world's tree, from his own perspective, and that's kind of a neat thing. Here's a story written from the perspective of King God. Ow, that hurt. That doesn't make it better. Alright, I'm going to read this now, so excuse me. I know that I hung on that windy tree, spear wounded, 9 full nights, given to Odin, to myself, on that tree that rose from roots that no man ever knows. No bread did they give me, nor drink from a horn. Downwards I peered. I took up the runes, screaming I took them. Then I fell back from there. 9 mighty spell songs I learned from the famous son of Balthor, Besla's father, and 1 swig I snatched of that glorious mead, drained from frenzy stirrer. Then I began to quicken and be wise, and to sprout and thrive. 1 word found another word for me, 1 deed found another deed for me. Runes you must find, and the meaningful symbols, very great symbols, very strong symbols, which the mighty sage stained, and the great powers made, and a rune master cut from among the powers. Odin for the Aesir, and Dane the dead one for the elves, Dvalin for the dwarves, Asvid for the giants. I myself carved some. Do you know how to carve? Do you know how to interpret? Do you know how to stain? Do you know how to test? Do you know how to ask? Do you know how to sacrifice? Do you know how to dispatch? Do you know how to slaughter? Better not invoked than too much sacrificed. A gift always looks for a return. Better not dispatched than to slaughter too much. So Thund carved before the history of nations, where he rose up when he came back. Ha! Yeah, see? I make loud noises sometimes. Say hi to the internet. See? Hello, YouTube. Cat. Meow. Yeah. Yes, you can stay, but only if you don't claw my face off. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in the story itself, but let's, before we get into that, just make sure that we're all on the same page with what some of these things are talking about. So, I know that I hung on that windy tree, Yggdrasil. Spear wounded, that's Gungnir, his own spear. His own spear that never misses its mark. He meant to do it. It's not an accident. He was willfully engaging with his suffering once more. Spear wounded by himself. 9 full nights. 9's a big number in old magic. So 9 full nights. Given to Odin, myself to myself, so King God, on the tree that rose from roots that no man ever knows. You can't know all the way down to where the Norns and the great powers are. Odin had forbidden anybody from helping him, so no bread did they give me, nor drink from a horn. And downwards I peered down into this well. I took up the runes, screaming I took them, then I fell back from there. And then he goes on to talk about another adventure he'd been on, getting wisdom. But then it gets into, then I began to quicken and be wise and to sprout and thrive. One word found another word for me. That's knowledge building on itself. And one deed found another deed for me. Adventurers must adventure. And runes you must find, and the meaningful symbols, very great symbols, very strong symbols, which the mighty sage stained, and the great powers made, and a rune master cut from among the powers. So one thing we got to understand about these runes is they're not just letters. Like when we write something, we just write the sounds out that we make, and then we write it down. Except in English, where we write it in a dozen different ways. But anyway, so the runes more like the thing itself. If you guys ever watched or read the book Aragon, there was a movie about it, the first book, or the stories, they were okay. They're not bad. But one of the things that the young hero going off on his adventure does is he learns the language of magic. Basically, the dragons are magic. He pair bonds with the dragon. And as he learns the words for fire or vision or whatever, in Draconic, he gains the ability to control those things. And that's kind of what we're talking about with runes. Runes isn't just magic. It's not just letters. Runes are the symbols that mean the thing. So to understand the rune is to understand the thing. Just like in Aragon, to understand, if you wanted to make a fireball, he had to know the word and understand the word for fire in Draconic, because in that story, dragons were the backbone of magic. So anyway, so runes is like the deepest, most fundamental of magic. It's symbolism to control the thing itself. So anyway, so he's going after that. Just want to make sure that we're talking about. Oh, right, down at the in Urd's well. One of the wells that waters Yggdrasil, the world's tree, is the well of Urd. And if you look, and it's bottomless, it's fathomless. It goes all the way down, and the great powers are down there, like the Norns. The Norns are the ones who decide the fates of all things, and they carve the runes into the trunk of Yggdrasil, and that, of course, makes the fates happen. Whatever your fate is, once it's carved in there, that's how they control it. So he's trying to learn these symbols from this ancient fundamental power source. It's the best magic you can have. And we'll talk about some of the specific spells and things that he learns later. But the idea was he's going after the deepest magic you can, which is the understanding of the things themselves, which is a heck of an idea. If you want to understand the thing, you have to understand the symbol, the thing, how to control. You need to understand all these things, and it's just whoosh, runes. And of course, Odin goes after that because it's the best kind of magic. Just want to make sure we're all good on the cosmology here. Better not invoke too much cycle. Yeah, okay, good. So let's get to the unpacking part of this. All right. So some of my thoughts on the story. Now that we understand, now hopefully we're all on the same page of what's going on here. So the idea is Odin is sacrificing himself to himself. Well, that's a strange idea. But before we get into that, let's talk about his motivation here. You got to remember, Odin was relentlessly seeking knowledge and wisdom. He talked to seers and prophets and other wise gods, and he was always questing and asking, and he was sacrificing, and he was engaging willingly with his suffering. We talked about that a while ago. But the reason he wanted to do all of this, the reason he wanted the knowledge and the wisdom, was specifically to prevent Ragnarok, the end of his world, the end of his world. Now there's going to be another world afterwards, which is nice, but he dies during Ragnarok. Most of his people die during Ragnarok. The world is consumed in terrible winters and an army of fire bad guys, and Ragnarok's a terrible thing. We're going to go through that later. But Odin wanted to prevent it, so he wants knowledge, he wants wisdom in order to prevent the ending of his world. Now, you got to remember, one of the main goals of our Excavating Wisdom project is digging up wisdom for our modern age one lesson at a time. That's the whole mantra here. And if you feel like the world's going a little crazy, like your world is ending, let's take a hard look at these stories and figure out, okay, what did this group of people telling these stories over and over and over again and refining them and making them as solid a story as possible. What were they getting at? They're talking about the king god, Odin himself, had one major driving force in his life: stop the ending of his world. Well, that makes sense. So if we're trying to keep our world together, if we're trying to keep it from falling off the rails, let's take a close look at what he does. He engages willingly with his suffering. He sacrifices where needed. He does all these things in order to find wisdom. Because wisdom is what he's going to need to prevent Ragnarok. Now, he fails in the end and Ragnarok happens and a whole lot of people die, and that's unfortunate. Maybe we can do better. So anyway, so that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to prevent Ragnarok. A few things. Okay, so 9 days of suffering on Yggdrasil. So he's on the world's tree. There's the biggest stage you can imagine. He's in front. It's a public display of suffering and weakness and death. So he's out for the 9 worlds. Everybody down, the Norns down at the bottom of the well. Everybody can see him at his weakest moment. Now you got to remember, the 2 greatest fears in life is death and public humiliation. And that's what we're doing all together. He's sacrificing himself. He's dying on Yggdrasil. He actually becomes the gallows god, which is a neat thing. We're going to talk about that in a sec. But he experiences death itself in a public and kind of humiliating way. But he engages with the 2 greatest fears that we have willingly. There's Odin for you. All right, so he's 9 days of suffering. He willingly engages with the suffering. If anybody's seen Deadpool, he suffers in that horrible place for over a weekend. I think they put him in a tank where he can't breathe for a weekend, or he can barely breathe on the weekend. He's on the edge of death for a weekend, and his powers come out, and he can do all sorts of fun things. Odin goes 9 days hanging with a spear wound that he gave himself. With Gungnir, his spear that never misses, so it's definitely intended to increase his suffering. But one of the things that I read up on was that the runes would only make themselves available, and there was 2 different things I found on this. One is the people who are worthy of it, and hopefully Odin. So if Odin is sacrificing sufficiently, it makes him worthy. And the other one is only the dead could learn the runes, or maybe the dying. It was a little murky there, but so you got to get right to the point of death before the runes can reveal themselves to you. So he sits there suffering, probably like as bad as Deadpool did, or Wade Wilson did before he becomes Deadpool, and that's what reveals the runes to him, makes him worthy of it. All right, so the next part is. It made him experience death. Now, there's a few things in there. One, when the Nordic people are trying to figure out what the ideal of ideals is, right? King God, right? Like, what is the best way of best ways to be? One of the things that they have to deal with is the same thing that we all have to deal with. This is temporary. This is finite. We all know, we might not want to talk about it, but we all know at the end of our days is the end of our days. We die at the end of it all. So having an ideal, having something at the tip of your hierarchy in the heavens that has experienced that can understand that becomes much more relatable, much more understanding. And if Odin is willing to go forth for wisdom to suffer and die for wisdom, well, we don't want to die, but we can do what we can. We can sacrifice, we can suffer, we can go through all these things. Even sometimes just the grind of day-to-day paying bills and whatnot. But his is obviously Odin's is obviously the extreme version of that. But it gives the idea that King God is like us. He experiences that fear, that humiliation, that death, but then endures beyond, and that's fascinating to me, because the idea it comes up all over and over again. I sacrificed myself to myself. Where's the line? I know that I hung on that windy tree, spear wounded 9 full nights, given to Odin, myself to myself. Well, that's a neat idea, because if you're King God, and you're going to make a sacrifice to the great powers below, what's the biggest, most powerful sacrifice you can make? Well, you. you're the king of heaven. You're all the Allfather. So to sacrifice yourself instead of sacrificing a goat or something else, or getting a volunteer to do it for you, you're doing it. You're the best you can be. You're the best of everything around, and you're going to give yourself up to Odin. Well, that's a neat idea, because I don't think that the Odin that sacrificed himself and the Odin that was sacrificed to are the same thing. I don't think they're the same person at all. I think when because we're limited and we're frail and whatever, we can't sacrifice like that. We can sacrifice a few things, but we can't we can't take it to that extreme. But we're talking about ideals here. This is the idea is as far as the idea can go. And I think what they're getting at is this idea that life is about growing. We always grow. No matter what we're doing, no matter what we give up, no matter what we lose, we're growing. It's like if you're in a relationship, you're either growing together by design or you grow apart over time, because growing isn't an option. It's what we always do. That's why relationships, you always have to continually bind yourselves together, or it doesn't work, because you just grow apart from each other eventually. But the idea of life is about growing is, okay, if you lose part of yourself, you can grow into the void. If you give up something, you can grow into the void. If you give up a bad habit, if you give up a hobby that is taking up a lot of your time instead of spending time with your family or whatever, you grow into the void that the sacrifice has left, and you become something bigger, more than you were. You become a better version of what was. And I think that's what they're kind of getting at here, is the idea that Odin is Allfather, King God, the best of the best of the best, the ideal of ideals, and he's going to sacrifice absolutely everything. That is the best sacrifice in this story that you can get. It's everything. It's everything of everything. It's all that he can be, and he sacrifices it all to become a better Odin, a bigger, better, badassier version of the Allfather. That's a hell of an idea. There is wisdom in that, absolutely. We can't go that far, of course, because we die. we wouldn't bounce back. But that's the ideal version of it, right? Is what's the biggest, most important thing to sacrifice? Well, Odin, to become the bigger, better version of himself. All right. So anyway, so that's the sacrifice part of it. So the runes, we talked about this already. The runes become clear. The runes aren't letters. They're like a bridge between the word and the thing. As in, to understand the runes is to understand the thing itself. I already made the Aragorn reference. Okay. Okay. So last time we talked about how Odin sacrificed an eye, and it became a net gain in the end for him. He was able to preserve. That was Mimir's head. Odin's eye was able to see the distilling of wisdom in Mimir's well, the vault of memory becoming wisdom, as nonsense flushes away and the good stuff stays. So the idea was when he sacrificed an eye, he grew and became wiser into that void that the sacrifice left. And when he sacrifices all of himself, he grows. He continues to grow, just like we do, to fill in the void. Because whatever it is about Odin that makes Odin Odin endured. There was some, like when he pulled out the eye, put it in the well, the eye keeps working. Well, that's neat. Mimir gets his head cut off and thrown in the well. And it keeps working. It keeps giving advice and preserves and whatever. But whatever it is about Odin, when he suffered humiliating death to learn these runes, something endured. And that something, even if it was like the soul, the consciousness, the mind of Odin, the power of Odin, the whatever it was, that made Odin Odin, his Odinness, I guess, that endured, just like his eye kept working. It wasn't about the physical, it was about whatever was left when he gave up everything. And that whatever was left became better and grew in to fill the void of that ultimate sacrifice. do smaller versions of that. Don't do all of that. It doesn't work out so well. But do smaller versions of that. All right. So the bonus round for anybody who wants to know what the spell songs that Odin was known as, the chants. He learned chants that enabled him to heal emotional and bodily wounds, to bind his enemies and render their weapons worthless, to help free himself from constraints, to put out fires, to expose and banish practitioners of malevolent magic, and to protect his friends in battle, to wake the dead, and to win and keep a lover. Yeah, there's your bonus round. Okay, those are my notes on Odin sacrificing himself to himself on Yggdrasil. Alright, thanks. Have a good one. Bye.